All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for joining me today for our lesson. Let's see, what are we at now? We're at lesson 3 Q&A Zoom meeting. And today we're going to look at base plans and client surveys and the importance of both of those. So maybe what I'll do here is just share my screen and we'll just review what we're going to be looking at submitting next week. There we go. All right, so it should, I don't think there's any mystery in terms of what we have to do here. So the assignment is in 2 parts, as a lot of them are. And the first is the base map that we're looking at doing, and the second here is the client survey, and they're actually both super important in the design phase. So let us take a look at the base plan first, because that may be where most people, well, maybe not have challenges, but just perhaps not know what the expectations are. So there's a pretty good introduction here on the lesson 2 page. And if we go down, there's a list here that's showing us the different elements that we want to see on your base plan. So really the base plan is a snapshot of your project site in this moment. And we want to try and include as much information as possible. It may also be that some of the really fine details are just not that important right now, and you don't really have to worry about that, but we're going to look at a couple of examples here and take a look at some of the elements. So, of course, we want the site and the project name and your designer's name, the designer name, the address, the date. So all of these at the top of the list are elements we want to try and carry forward with every drawing that you do. And it's very important that we know who's doing that, and the date is also super important. With the design work we do, we often will be making revisions, so the date helps us verify what is current. And then beyond that, we're looking at some pretty obvious things. So any structures, the roof lines, where the fall on those roofs are, roads, pathways, utilities, whether they're underground or overhead. Obviously, overhead are easy to identify. Underground may be a little bit trickier. But I had an interesting experience with this in terms of underground utilities, and we had designed a rain garden for a client close to where I live, and we were getting ready to price it and install this, and realized that I didn't know where the sanitary sewer was coming into the house. So that had a huge impact on where the rain garden was going, because you do not want to put a rain garden on top of any utilities. So these are important to consider. Contour lines, if you can get them, and we're going to touch on that today. Any fences, any water movement, waterways. So people that are on larger properties, that may be more relevant, sort of water spigots. So often those are on the outside of the house, wells on larger properties, and then existing vegetation. So when we put together base plans, we really dial into significant existing vegetation. If our client had gone and planted, like say a heather the week before, a little a little evergreen plant, it's just not something that we'll make a list of it, but we're not really going to be too worried about where it goes on the drawing. but you do want significant trees and shrubs. And if there are, say, herbs and herbaceous perennials in there as well, you can certainly identify those, but often because they tend to be a little bit on the portable side, so we can move them fairly easily, we tend to just list these and reference them when we're looking at planting plans. We want a legend or a key, and of course property lines and any easements or setbacks that you're aware of. And then of course anything else that you deem to be really important. So let's take a look at an example here. And just as a reminder, when you log on to this onto the Canvas platform, if you push the modules page, there are a lot of resources on here that people might want to take a look at. And one of those is the sample student reports. As well, for anybody who's looking at doing design work for others, take a look at this client interface page. This is really interesting. I think there's four of us instructors who have put together our process from the beginning of a design to the end, and we're all entirely different. So there's lots of little nuggets there that you might find enjoyable. But let's take a peek at one of the student examples here. Oh, sorry. I'm on the template file. There we go. All right, so there we go. Here is one former student's base plan, and I believe this is a couple of acres, and this is pretty, this is a pretty good base plan. There's fencing in place, property line. All of the structures are fairly easy to locate. There's some rainwater harvesting cisterns already. Driveway. Here is the edge of a forest, right? And that's one way you can define a wooded area without having to put in individual tree symbols. So you can make it sort of, a filled polygon, or give it a little bit of an undulated effect. And again, that is a good way of doing that. At the front of the house, where there are, more significant individual trees and shrubs, those have been placed here. And you can see on the base map, so there's deciduous and conifers and hedge and shrub symbols here. So we don't need to know in the base plan exactly which plant this is or that is. We just want to know that, yes, they are there and they're either a tree or a shrub at this point. So a few things that I do notice here: I don't see any overhead utilities or underground utilities. Yeah, I don't see any well, and I don't see any septic field. So those are a couple items that, you'd want to try and include. If you're on acreage, you probably know where your septic field is, if you have one, and you would certainly know where your well is. So those would be important items to add if that indeed was part of your project site. And let's see here. Just seeing if there's any. This person went to the extent of adding some rock, some paving areas, some impervious surfaces, and a little fire pit, and a water tank. So this is pretty well done, and this is a black and white version. A couple of things to note: we definitely want to have an accurate scale, and you want to have a north arrow, and how you depict that is entirely up to you. That's one version you could use. And then the student has a, I see, has a colorized version with utilities. So the reality is your base plan should include the utilities. So this one here is sort of a step in that direction. We would want to, even though this is somewhat schematic by the looks of it, it's still giving us a good idea of where the water, and there is a protected water course in here. That would be definitely important to include. Any kind of riparian area. Yeah, so they've done a good job of letting us know what is here, and as well as a septic tank. And it looks like Ruben has a question. Ruben, do you want to unmute yourself and jump in? If you're having troubles with muting, just go to the bottom left hand. It should be the bottom left part of the screen. You'll see a mute button. Just click on that and you could unmute yourself. There we go. I've asked you to unmute, but I don't know if that will help. Okay, well, we can come back to you, Ruben, no problem. Also, if you do have a question and you don't want to verbalize that, you can certainly put it in the chat. So no problem there. There's a chat window you can type into. All right, so we'll keep going, but we'll come back to Ruben's question. Oh, there you are, Ruben. Do you have anything you want to ask?
Yeah, I had a few questions. One, we had the black and white and the colored map. Is that because one is intended to be printed, or do you have one that you prefer over the other? Because I like the print, but if I was I like the color, but if I were to print it, maybe that would change my calculus a little bit.
Yeah, well, I think if we look at the template file, we will see the template file asks for both. So we have a regular base map, and then we have a grayscale, right? So the grayscale is basically what we saw on that first example, except it doesn't have the utilities. And both are going to be very helpful. So at this stage, it's probably quite easy to create the grayscale. If you were to place this, see, I guess one way of looking at it is your base plan is that bottom layer of the drawing, and all this work we're going to do in the coming weeks, we're going to be adding on top of that. And eventually, they all come together to form, your concept, your final design, or whatever task or layer you're working on. So if we were to put this drawing as an underlay on some of the work, it may be distracting. So having both gives you the option of going either way, because typically, and I can show you what, I'll try and dig up an example of what we do. But let's, we do let's say we're doing an urban design. We tend to look, after a base plan creation, we look at a water layer, an access layer, and a soil layer. So we look at 3 distinct layers that we're going to run through. And whenever we're depicting that, we tend to gray out everything else. So we want to just focus on that particular layer. And then when we combine them all together for a concept, we color up everything, right? So I hope that helps you a little bit there, Ruben. Yeah, you want both if you can. And in this case, this student also has a Google Earth image, and they've also worked in some contours. So that's completely, well, I'll show you a trick with the contours, especially those in urban areas. But The reality is if you're doing this for a client, you want these contours to be accurate, as accurate as you can get. So for us, we use QGIS and LiDAR data where we're able to derive site information like that, provided the site hasn't been disturbed since the measurements were taken. But there's lots of other ways to do it. We used to use drone surveys with photo geometry, and we'd get high definition images, plus we would get that topographic data as well. So there's lots of ways to do it. And what I'm going to show you is not what I would recommend you do for a client, but it's a quick and easy thing for this class, right? Because really what we're going to do is go through some exercises based on the contour information. So if you can't get super accurate information, no worries. We'll just try and get what you can. And in this case, these are 2 meter intervals, which is quite a long, that's it's not ideal, but let us see. I'll just show you what I use. We can go to Contour Creator. So if you're in an urban site, Contour Map Creator is a good place to go. And oh gosh, there we go. So if you go to Contour Map Creator, I often change the resolution to make it a little bit bigger. And let's see. Of course, I always want to scroll in. So what you do here is, first of all, you have to plot your options. So let's say we want to be in US units or imperial units, and I want to get 1 foot contours. So that's all I have to do there. And the next is define where I want the contours. So we actually would just click up in one area and click in another. There we go. So you have an, top right, bottom left, or whatever sequence you want to do. You just define the space that you want the data taken from, and then you hit get data, and there we go. We have a little, that is very interesting. It changed. So we're going to do that again. There we are. So on the right here, we have a legend, and on the left, we have 1 foot contour data. And I would not be doing anything too serious with this information because it's taken from Google Earth and it's just not that accurate. But for this exercise, or for this class, particularly in urban areas, this is a helpful tool because it's actually can be quite hard to get topographic data. Now, places like Oregon, I think the whole state of Oregon has had LiDAR mapping done. So you're very lucky down there. You can access that information. You might have to get it converted for you, but there is a lot of different resources. So to make it simple, if we're in, particularly in small spaces, Contour Creator will at least give you, something that's fairly accurate. And this is fairly accurate, but again, I wouldn't be using it for work for pay. We'll say that. Okay. There we go. So again, the student made 3 different contour or 3 different base plans. And personally, I would be combining the utilities into this. And if you can, try not to make it look like schematic. Try and make it reflect where these services may or may not be. Because
What do you mean by that? What makes it look schematic?
well, it reminds me of an electrical drawing where everything is very straight and right angled and it's all together, and you know, it could be probably not, but it could be that way. So you just want to try and get it as accurate as you can, and if it's below ground, that may be really difficult to do, right? But you just have to try your best. Let's see here. So that is a little bit about the base plan. So that's by far probably the most important part of this exercise. So if anybody has any questions about it, I see there's a couple in the chat here. Okay, so Ruben posted a link. Okay, and there's a question about north up. I think that's from Ruben.
Yeah, on this one, like if you look at this example, like my site as well is very elongated in a particular dimension, and it just happens to be the east-west dimension, so or north-south. So like if I put it like that, I lose a lot of it creates a lot of white space. Is there any point at which you would change it, or do you always keep that as a rule?
Well, what I tend to do, like the standard is, and even in the southern hemisphere, believe it or not, the standard is always north up. So for your base plan, I would stick with that. Now, when we get into work where we're looking at, a given area, let's say you're doing your zone 1 design and it's just right in here, you can orientate your drawing any way you want, as long as you're letting everybody know, your north arrow is reflected in your drawing. It's turned accordingly. But if you can, I would be keeping it north up for the bigger picture items. And what you'll find is as you look at more and more plans and more designs, you begin to develop, obviously the southern exposure is a big one. So when maps start getting turned and you initially look at them and you think they're north up, it can throw you off a little bit. So I totally get what you're saying, Ruben. If you can do it north up with your project site in your base plan, I would do so, and then dial it in accordingly with some more fine-tune, finer work, like when we get to the zone 1 design and that sort of thing. So hope that answers your question. Tyler, you got your hand up. Do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I was wondering, how do you create an accurate scale bar at the bottom of every site map?
Well, there's a couple ways you can do that. I'm going to pull up Google Earth Pro here. I'll stop share for a second. There is a video that is probably at the top. Let me just see here. Okay, if you go to, just while this is loading. So if you're on lesson 2's assignment page, and there's the base map and our client survey, which we'll talk about, under assignment resources, how to make a scale bar. So we have a little tutorial video, but I'll give you a very quick intro to that. So if we have Google Earth here, which some of you are going to be using. And we'll just zoom in here. We'll just randomly pick somewhere. So first thing you want to do, for those who don't know, if you're using Google Earth and you zoom in and you zoom out, you can see you're in this perspective view, and that is not what you want for any mapping. So just tap the U key and you'll go directly overhead. And that is the sort of screenshot you want to take. And the reason for that is then these lines will be scaled. If in a perspective view, the back line is going to be a different length than the scale indicates, right? Because it's further away from the viewer. So again, we're up here. Now you'll see down in the left corner, I have a scale bar already. Okay, and that is, I'm pretty sure I have that under my preferences under Google Earth Pro. If you don't have it showing, that's completely fine. What you do is you get to where you want to go, and then you just hit print. And as soon as you go to print, you get a scale bar generated in the corner. So that's one way of doing it. If you're going to make use of Google Earth Image and you're going to sort of trace over or whatever you want to do. Like, again, I wouldn't do this for a client because the accuracy is just not there, but for this exercise, that's great. Now, the other option is if you have a plot plan that let's say you've got, we'll say that this is not Google Earth. I'm just going to cancel this. There we go. Let's say you have an image, overhead image of, and this is your site, project site, and you want to make a scale bar. So what you need to do is find something on the drawing or the image that you know the distance of. So let's say this is your garage and you know the garage is 20 feet wide. When you have this on a piece of paper, you measure it with a ruler, and let's say it measures out at 2 inches. So you then know on the paper that 2 inches equals 20 feet, or 1 inch equals 10. So that is a very quick way of creating a scale bar. And in that example, you could make a nice scale bar in terms of some good increments. Right down here, you can see this bar says I'm 22 meters. That's not an ideal measurement. I'd rather have it kind of rounded up. There you go, to 60, or something that's a little more tangible. Does that help you out, Tyler? Check out that video because it will walk you through the process I just described.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So I'm just going to run through the chat here. I'm sorry I'm lagging behind a little bit. So thanks, Ruben, for the links that you've included there. And yes, north up if you can do it. Autumn has a question here. When you're doing larger properties, should you break your base map into sections? No, I wouldn't do that. I would leave it the size it is. And the template file is, I believe, 11 by 17. So that's a nice format. And even if it was, 1,000 acres, you definitely want to have your base plan showing the whole. And then if you have to zoom in with some other maps, then you can start to look at certain sections, but you definitely want to show the whole. So I hope that answers your question there, Autumn. So Jennifer had a comment here. You can always do 2 sides with north up and a bit longer. You could, but make sure you include one that is that entire base plan, that whole base plan. That's really an important thing. You want to see the whole property in one go. And another question here with Ruben. What about accuracy? So you've measured some stuff out on your property. How can you add them to scale on Google? Yeah, you'd have to kind of fudge it a little bit, Ruben, because Google is pretty inaccurate when you start getting to that level. You know, you measure, let's say you measure a garage 20 feet and Google says it's 23. I mean, you know, you would not normally use Google Earth to map a property out. It's just a little too, it's just too inaccurate, right? So again, we use drone surveys for larger properties, and those high resolution images let us trace all of these elements that we're trying to include in the base plan. Let's see here. I hope that probably doesn't really answer your question, Ruben, except that just do your best with what you have. You're going to have to fudge it a little bit because you'll probably, are you on an urban site?
Yeah, so yes, my question, like if I were doing this on paper, once I have my scale, I would just take a compass and I would say like, this is 20 feet. And then like, oh, I know that that thing is 42 feet. So I like, you know, scale it out. But on Google or in slides or anything, as soon as I charge moving an object, I also change its dimensions. So I have no way of like taking a line and rotating it 35 degrees and moving it over here so that I can measure out 20 feet this way instead of that way. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
yeah.
So with Google Earth, let's go back to that for a minute. Google Earth is a pretty interesting, oops, I'm not going to do that. Sorry, the top of my screen's knocked off here. So if I wanted to draw some lines on Google Earth, there's a couple of ways of doing that. You can add a polygon. So let's say I want to do the house, right? So we can just start clicking and moving our way around the house. And what it's going to do, let's say we finish there, then we can move these. So it's pretty easy to edit. And let's say, go up to measurements. This tells us the perimeter, the size of the polygon. So polygon's enclosed, it's always enclosed, it's not a line, right? So that's one way you can draw a shape on Google Earth. And you could take a screenshot and import that into your drawing, and then that scale is not going to change, right? If we are,
Well, so like say, for example, in the right side, there's that open field. What if, since that drawing has been done, what if you've made 3 plantings and there's 2 rows at an angle or something in that field, right? So I measured out from a known point, you know, I know it's this much north and this much east of the corner of the house, you know, or whatever, you know, you have a known point, you measure out, but then like, okay, so I want it to be right here and I want it to go at 30 degrees to north. Okay, I want it, there's a row that's 30 feet long here. That's really, you know, like on paper, that would be just a bunch of protractor and compass work, but on here, I don't even know how I'd do that.
No, it's a little trickier here because it's really not set up as a design software, right? So the software that we use, we could easily do that, but we have a kind of limited toolbox for the course. And you know, part of the reason for that is we don't want you to spend the next 20 weeks learning the software we want you to really dial into the design process. So for those who want to do more of this kind of work after the course, you then have the design protocol sort of in your head, and then you can start looking at how you want to express that. Do you want to do that by hand, which for a lot of people works. For me, it doesn't. I'm not very, I'm not great with drawing. So even though, I just made that decision 25 years ago when we purchased their first software, and I've stuck with that. So if I had to, I could, but it would be a painful learning curve. And I'm very used to quickly editing and being able to click on something and know the square footage and all of these really helpful tools that are a little trickier with hand-drawn work. So I don't know if that's really helped you, Ruben, but yeah, this is limited. And if you want to really dial into being more accurate, you'd rely on Google Earth less, right? Do more on-site measuring. And we don't really get into that, but mapping, that's a huge part of a job, even on an urban project. And ideally, it starts with a plot plan with a building footprint. So often the homeowner will have that. They'll show the property lines and where the footprint of the building is located. We'll stop that. So, we could certainly get into that a little bit. We could touch on it today, but it's really just triangulating. So if you know where
I had
you're,
another question similar to that. So I watched your client interface video, and actually I watched all of the people, the different ones.
Yeah.
And what I find which interesting about yours compared to the others, it seems like, so my two questions are, what kind of clientele do you, it seems like you're aiming more towards like an industrial, larger scale clientele compared to some of the others. And kind of to follow up on what Heather said, you keep saying things like, well, I wouldn't use this, right? Like,
right.
You 25 years ago, so right off the bat, you used Landmark Pro, or did you taper,
Yeah, well, good questions. Our company's evolved a lot, and the first design I ever did 25 years ago was a planter, right? It was like a 4x8 planter. And today we tend to do a lot of acreage sites, like homestead sites. We do commercial, or we have done a lot of commercial design, but that's completely different. You're working with a team of engineers and architects. The homestead is just kind of us doing our thing. And in the last year, we've been doing a farm design based on the agrarian platform. So that's my, I would say that's my favorite at the moment. So yeah, it's probably what we've done most of is acreage homesteads, and those are all completely different, right? Some people, way back, we really did a lot of high-end residential, and they happened to be on acreages, but it was all about imposing your will on the site. Somebody wants X and you make it happen. Whereas now we dial into the resources that are on the site and work with them and try and optimize them. And water is the biggie with that. That's the first step. So hopefully that helps you out here. I'm just going to run through a couple of the items on the chat here. Okay, Autumn had to go. And Heather, so yeah, I would not use. Yeah, so some of the tools I'm showing you, Heather, would be, again, so that you really focus on the design process if you have, after this course, you wanted to do a design for somebody, you would have a lot of really good tools to move forward with. But I would suggest that you might have to consider doing this by hand or finding a software that works for you. The one we use is Vectorworks Landmark, but it's very expensive and it takes quite a while to learn. So way back when we bought it, the internet was just coming in to existence, which is pretty bizarre to consider. And the tools to learn were just books. So it took a long time, probably took a good year to start to get a feel for it.
Thanks,
yeah.
thanks for that. That makes sense, actually. I'm like, when you said that, I thought, oh, of course, because I am already having a learning curve with
Yes.
Google Earth Pro. It's been a battle, but thanks for your words on that, and thanks, Ruben, for your support too. I wanted to ask you, Jamie, if there's an industry standard, like drawing by hand versus the online. What's sort of normal now in our world?
Well, I would say that most we'll look at the landscape architects, right, of the world. Most of them use CAD, right, a computer aided.
Yeah.
But I also know landscape architects that draw by hand, and so the trouble with the CAD is the cost. So if you just do a design or two a year, it's pretty hard to justify not only the cost, but like Vectorworks Landmark, retail in Canada is about $4,000. And if you want to make use of the 3-dimensional models you can create, so we can create site models, you have to have a pretty robust computer. So, you add $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 to that, you have to be using it fairly, to justify it, right? We were fortunate we bought that years ago, so we just pay annually for an upgrade. It's not such a big deal, but we still use it a lot. I use it for farm design, and we also use QGIS for larger scale, along with Cloud Compare. And we're also diving into Twin Motion, which is a 3-dimensional rendering software so that you can make your designs come to life. I don't have an example to show you, but and those take up a lot of computer power. So by hand, if I was starting today, what I would probably do is buy an iPad and buy a software called Trace. And that goes on an iPad, and it's like $30 a year or $50 a year. It's super cheap. And it will allow you to create various layers, and you can control the visibilities. And that is a great entry level tool because iPads are, just very useful to have, period. And that's what I recommend people at least start with. And then if you find, wow, this is great, and I want to keep doing this kind of work, then you can start looking at slowly upgrading. But every time you upgrade, it's, a little bit of a painful learning curve that's involved with it. Yeah. So
awesome. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem. So
I happen to have an iPad, so I'm going to look that.
There you go.
That Trace. Yeah.
Yeah, you just need that and the Apple Pencil. That's definitely what you want to have. You have to have the pencil pretty much. But Trace is great. Yeah, cool. Very much enjoy that one. And there's lots of videos online for tutorials with that, because that's the one thing about it. There's not a lot of support. built into the software itself. So you pretty much have to have some other reference.
Mhm.
Yeah, so let me just whiz down the
Oh, yeah.
chat here.
I like what you said, Sean.
I use QGIS to do topo lines. So Ruben used QGIS. Good for you. If you want to start with a software that has an incredible learning curve, that's the one, because it's a open source free software. But oh my, it does take. It's not intuitive at all. You can get a 1-month trial for Landmark. That's quite true. You can with most softwares. Okay, so Sean had we haven't even looked at the client survey, have we? No. So Sean, you're saying that you'd want both. If you were a client, you'd want both hand-drawn, so it has an artistic feel as well as the digital. Let me see if I can find a couple 3D examples here.
Yeah, I really like that idea, Sean, of just asking the client too what they want, because maybe they want something really simple and we might think, oh, it needs to be really, high tech, and they don't actually vibe with that. So
Yeah, you know what we do is we will provide examples. I'll just show you. When we do a proposal, we will, okay, I'm just going to share my screen here. So here's a project we did. It was just for a retaining wall in an environmentally sensitive area. So this is the very, very rudimentary 3D here that was done. Nice thing is we can make a slope analysis. So with this, we're able to determine where our troublesome slope is. It's hard to see here because it's not zoomed in, but all these colors have slope meetings. So obviously anything red is over 50%, which is quite a bit. And then these are just section views. So they're just slices in the landscape to look at how the slope is. And there's some contour information. This was all derived from a drone survey. And then some details here on the wall. And Ruben will like this. There you go, north up, even though it wasn't perfect. Gosh, I'm trying to remember why I was looking at this. Okay. Examples. So we'll send that to somebody. Here is another one. This is a farm that I actually did for fun for a friend. We're just looking at climate and then the different zones and some basically a water layer. So I guess where I'm going with this is whenever we do, here's an interesting one, a little bit more in terms of, this was all about water. This was the water layer. So this was the macro and the micro watershed, which we're all going to get to. And then here is the water layer, and you can see all the topographic info we have. And this is quite a large site. But this is the sort of information that we provide to people, these examples. when we give them a proposal. So they know the kind of deliverables that we're going to provide to them. That way there's no misunderstanding. And we want to be as clear as possible. So part of that is we start with a good fit call. We make sure that what they want and what we provide are a good match. And then we have an extensive questionnaire they go through. And that's probably something we should just touch on today, is that client survey part. And it's actually a very, very important part of the process, even though I haven't talked about it much, but it may not be that important for your exercise here. If your project site is your property, you may think, well, this is just kind of an interesting process to go through. But if you're working for somebody, you really need to know what they want and what they find important, so that you are on the right path. And again, we have quite a long survey that we have people fill in, and some of the important things are what they like about their site, what they don't like. Those are, even though they're very obvious, those are very important things that you want to know. What their vision is, and whether that actually aligns with their budget, because that's a big one. And certainly right now with inflation going up, it's having a profound effect. We just, as an aside, we are getting ready to do an installation next week. We priced the project that we're doing a month ago, and with a caveat that we're going to have to revisit that when we get close. So I did that over the weekend, and we're basically 10% higher in 30 days. And that's a lot of money, but that's what's going on. And you just got to position yourself to protect yourself as much as you can. But if somebody in their survey said, well, I want to spend, $5,000, but they're on 10 acres and they want to do some significant changes, that's probably not in alignment, right? So that's one of the important things about the survey, is not only what they want, but what they feel they can afford. And it's very hard for people to tell you that number. We've done some very, very expensive projects, and nobody at that time would divulge what they were willing to spend, thinking that we might want to, that we would design to that number rather than just designing what we think is appropriate. So it's really tricky for a lot of folks. And a lot of people don't know. And I'm sure most of you wouldn't know either, right? At this point, having not gone through, the design process and seen something executed, and how that plays out in terms of cost. So we're getting a little bit off topic, but I just thought I'd throw that in there. Ruben had a comment here. Do you have contracts to install? Do you supervise or do it yourself? Yeah, we are a design build firm, so we'll have a contract for the design process. And if somebody wishes to put it in themselves or do whatever they want beyond the design, it's totally up to them, right? So they're not tied into us beyond that first stage. Most people will ask us to price the install, and that's a whole separate portion of a project. And in some cases, like that retaining wall I showed you, we don't do masonry work, but we would manage an installation. So we get a percentage of the total to oversee it and make sure that it gets implemented as per drawing. Those are less fun, don't really enjoy those so much. So we're still installing our own work, but the plan is to shift that a little bit over the coming year or two, because I've been doing this for over 35 years and I'm starting to feel like I want a little bit of a change, rather grow plants. than install landscapes now. So we'll still design and do all that, but I'm trying to get some other contractors around this area to do some of the installations for us. But that's not easy either, because where I live, there's, you know, the bar is pretty low in terms of the landscape. So doing it yourself is fun. It's just you can't do it forever. So I hope that answered your question there, Ruben. Tyler, you still have your hand up. Do you have a question?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, man.
Yeah. Yeah, before we transition more into the client interview. Yeah, I'm wondering, because words like standards, you know, industry standard or things of that nature, regardless of what's the norm or the standard, will this class provide will it still provide a formation and a you know, a training, a way to learn the process and develop a process that function and works for the individual student? Because I'm thinking of myself, and I'm not sure if I'll get really into the technological methodology of you know, using graphics for drawing up designs. I actually think that if I was to become technical in making designs, I might be more interested in using landscaping paper and pencil, just because it naturally feels a little bit more aligned with my interests. So
yeah. Well,
yeah, I don't know.
you'll
I'm
probably
curious
find
around the process.
Yeah, you'll probably find your process continually changes. I know mine has. So way back, I had these incredible opportunities that just seemed to appear very early in my career after my training. So I spent about a decade training and then went on the self-employment route with our own design build company with my wife, Angela. And we used to just do very rough concepts, right? So we'd show bed shapes and elements, and, you know, there'd be plant symbols in there, but nothing specific. And then we would come to an agreement, and there would be no price for the project, right? No set price. It would be time and materials, or it would be what's called cost plus. So we would charge our labor, we would buy materials, and we would put an agreed upon markup on the material.
You're describing exactly what I'm doing right now.
Yeah. So
almost.
So we went down that path for years. We did that for over a decade, but it had some serious repercussions, we'll say, because there was no budget fixed. So today, and I just finished it this morning before the call, we do fixed price budgets for, you know, urban or 10 acres. It doesn't matter the size. We figure it out, and that's our price. And then the client can say, oh, yeah, that's great. Or no, I can't do that. So when we got into larger projects that were cost plus, and we kind of floated these numbers, oh, it should be this, it should be that, they all came in way higher. And that is not good when it comes to dealing with your clients, because they may love what you're doing, but they're like, wow, this is costing way more than I thought. And it's tricky. So I actually got to a point where we shut down our company and I went to work with somebody else. And I was a project estimator and manager. And I started that job having no idea how to estimate projects. but there is a formula to that, just like there is to permaculture design. So I learned that, and then I stayed with that job a couple of years, and then we started a new company, started again, and we did it with that model, and it's turned out really well. But it took some, it's way more risk in some ways with a fixed price, but the client then knows what they're going to spend, and they know the deliverable, what they're going to get. So it's just, it's safer. I wouldn't want to go back to those early years when, especially with some of the retaining walls that we were involved with, these massive retaining walls, it'd be $200,000, right? Just insane, really. It is. It's insane. And you had no idea what that number was going to be. So people would go through the process with you. They'd love the landscape, but they didn't love what they're having to pay. So I would, I bet you with yourself, if you're going down that path, because that's a really safe way to start. What I would suggest, track all your time on all of your, figure out how long it takes you to move a yard of soil, a yard of wood chips, to plant, things like that. And then you can carry that forward one day if you feel you want to start putting a fixed number on it. And funny enough, with the cost plus, we found that we were not making what we thought we were. We thought, oh, wow, here's our net profit. But no, it's not really, because you have overhead in your company that has to be paid for somehow. And the system we use now is actually called overhead recovery system. So we bid to recover our overhead. Then we look at how much profit we want to make on an individual project. So, and there's still a risk. A quote is a guess, but we've been doing it so long that, it's, I don't miss the mark on it. We'll say that, done it enough, I can accurately quote something. But I totally get it, what you're doing, and that's how I started for sure. And you may find you get some negative feedback down the road if things cost more. So yeah, but we were all very loosey-goosey, right? A concept plan. We didn't even talk about what plants. And then I'd look at availability lists, because that was really a strong point for me, was my plant knowledge. And then when you just bring in all this material and plant based on what's on site in that day. And it was great in a lot of ways, and it was very stressful in a lot of ways. Whereas now we do that all on paper first. So I know how much it's going to cost, and I've done it enough. I know how it's going to look. It's very difficult to figure that out when you're, putting circles on a drawing. How's this going to look together? Well, after a while, you get to know what you really like to see together and what's going to feel right. But yeah, it's a very interesting career. You're always learning and changing your process. Even now we still are changing our process. We had one project where last year we had to modify a lot of the planting. It's actually the one in the example video that I showed of our process. That job, 50% of the plant material wasn't available. So I had to change it out for something else, and it was all agreed upon by my client. But afterwards, they asked for an as-built, which is an updated drawing based on what actually got put in the ground. And for me to go and do that, that's probably 15 hours of design work. It's huge. And but it, you know, it's a reasonable request. So that's something now we include in our agreements. You know, sure, we'll supply it, but you'd have to pay for it. And it's probably a one-of. It probably will never happen again. But this person wanted to know where everything was, and yeah. So I'm sure you'll find your process is continually shifting a little bit based on the feedback you're getting. And it's not easy because all clients are very different, right? So, but it's super enjoyable. Does that help you, Tyler? Or
Yeah, and I think at this point I'm doing a lot more labor and install than design. I do have one, you know, this actual class is covering one project that will include a large, you know, a detailed design, but the rest of the work I'm doing is a lot smaller, and I'm really just doing labor and install for myself as a small, you know, business owner
Sure.
at this point.
I used to just renovate. That's how my first days were just someone say, "Oh, I want to make changes," and I'd come and look at it, and I'd actually just run a hose on the ground. Okay, here's the bed shape. Yeah, that looks great. And then I'd just wing it. And that's the way I like to work. But I can't work that way now because I would never know what anything costs. So, but it was good for my creative process going that route. You know, just being very open. And I was working by myself too. So when you start working with others, you know, it just everybody wants to know what they're doing, and a drawing does help that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Let me just see if I've gotten to the end of all of the chat here. Yeah, communication is the key. You're quite right, Heather. That is very much the case.
I was just quoting Sean. I can't take credit for that one.
And Debbie Sue, thank you very much, Debbie Sue. Happy to share whatever I can with you in the time that I have. Yeah, so I guess the only other thing I should just touch on, we're running a little bit late here, which is easy to do, is just look at the client survey. So again, that's a really important part of this whole process, and it's quite well laid out in the template file here, all the pertinent questions. And you know, they are some very good questions. And this is, you know, if you are installing for somebody, you definitely want to know, you know, I don't want to be fixated on price here, but that's an important part of it. That can be, most people have no idea how much landscapes cost. And at the beginning, you might not either, right? But it takes a little bit of time. Then before you know it, you're looking at every square foot of garden, and you can put a number to that. Maybe that's $10 a square foot, or $12 a square foot, or, you know, just these averages might be less. The inventory, that is very, very important. What people have and what they want. So this is really going to play heavily into your design process as well. And the questionnaire that we have, I mean, it's a lot longer than this, but it's very, very similar in what we're trying to ask people what they have and what they, you know, what they like, you know, where they heard about us. That's something that's important too, how they found us. And yeah, these are great questions. What do you like most, and what do you not like? What are you trying to fix, and some of those top concerns and top goals? So if this is your project site that you're designing, you know, this is a great exercise to go through. And if you are intending to design for others, I would put together something that is similar to this. Doesn't have to be exact, but this is quite broad, and you certainly want to touch on, you know, you want to get to know your clients as much as possible. And the questionnaire is something we have people fill in right away when they first contact us. So if they're not willing to do that, which the odd person doesn't want to, then we know, okay, we're not a good fit. You got to put a little bit of effort in. Yeah, is there any questions at all? I see there's a couple more items in the chat here. Yes, Tyler, you're quite right. Base map and client interview are due. And if you have any question about that at any time, of course, the discussion board will let you know. And there's also in the course modules section goes through each lesson and what the learning materials are and what the assignments are there as well. So yeah. So the base map is going to be probably what you spend most of your time on, right? And then the client interview will be a little bit of a less in terms of time, but yeah, those are the two items and they are very important. And then we're going to get into site analysis over the next few lessons after this one. So, okay. So does anybody have anything else they want to say before we wrap up today? Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much for taking time to join me today. It was great. Some really good questions. And I really enjoy that part of it. So the more questions, the better.
Where's your email listed on Canvas so I can go?
Yeah,
look
you
for
can. My email would be in the initial message I sent out at the beginning of the class. It was a welcome to the class email, or it would have been a message that you would have got through Canvas. My email is at the end of that note. Because this is going on to YouTube, I'd rather not tell you my email. I'll send you out a note, Tyler, if you want, with my email address. And you can get a hold of me either through the inbox icon on the left-hand side of the platform, or you can just email me direct. Completely fine either way. I get them either way. So yeah. So anyways, thank you very much, everybody, for being part of today's Q&A, and have yourself a great week. We look forward to seeing your base plans next Monday. Okay, so bye for now.